Begin the current Daf, Succah Daf Yud. We begin 9 lines down at the top of the Yomim, where the Gemara continues the discussion in the previous Daf regarding Sukkah Tacha Sukkah, regarding the invalidation of having one Sukkah beneath another Sukkah. What qualifies as a Sukkah beneath a Sukkah? Ashis corresponds to the concept of Chesed, time to the 10% of today's Daf. It's Chesed B'Tinei Ben Yehudis. Something we can discuss in today's Daf, as we mentioned, Sukkah Tacha Sukkah, how tall does the upper Sukkah need to be to invalidate the lower Sukkah? That is a Sukkah on top of the Sukkah. When can you spread a sheet above or below the schach and not invalidate the Sukkah because of a schach puzzle? What kind of canopy bed can be slept on in the Sukkah, because then you're in some other area, not in the area of the Sukkah. So the key to the concept of today's Daf are Resh Galusa, that was the person in charge of all the people in the diaspora. Mitzvah is the concept that if you're engaged in one mitzvah, you're exempt from performing another mitzvah. Kila, Kleet, Kinaifis, these are going to be different types of canopy beds, and there's going to be a significant difference regarding if it's like a kila, which is like 4 posts, which is therefore you have a roof, or that of like Kleeton, which is only has 2 posts, which therefore you don't really have a roof of a tefach, it's on a slant, and that's going to have a significance around the halachas of that type of a bed inside the sukkah. So begin the current Daf Yud, 9 lines down at the top of the Amen. Says the Gemara, Kam Yehei, how much does the gap have to be being sukkah l'sukkah between one sukkah and the other one, meaning between the schach of the lower one and the schach of the upper one, and that's going to make the lower one possible because of a sukkah beneath a sukkah. In other words, and not that you're going to say that it's one sukkah. One makes it into 2 different sukkahs to make it a sukkah tachas sukkah. So it's a machlekes. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says that it's a tefach, it's a handbreadth. Because if it's less than a tefach, it's really one schach. Because it's a little gap between one schach and another schach, that's not going to make it into another sukkah tachas sukkah. It would be considered as one schach. But if it's a gap of a tefach, that would make it. And he says, you find this source in halacha by a tent in a closed area that has tumah inside with a gap of a tefach. Which the gear says it's not like when the mission set this also says tefach al tefach, verum tefach. If you have a tefach squared in area with a height of a tefach of a handbreadth, maybe a tumah, that brings the tumah, meaning to say that that's going to convey tumah, and it also interposes in front of tumah, which that's halacha l'moish mesina. But if it's less than the height of a tefach, loy maybe it doesn't bring the tumah. So if, let's say, what does that mean if it brings the tumah? If you have tumah beneath one end of this covering, and you have kalim beneath, let's say a board, and you have kalim beneath the other end of that board, so you have a very long and narrow board that's a width of a tefach, so that's fit to go ahead and bring tumah from one end to the other one. It's not going to go ahead and do that if it doesn't have a height of a gap of a tefach from the ground to that board. So although we generally say in tumas oil, anything that's beneath that board or whatever it is going to have tumah on one side, it's going to have contaminate something else on the other side, but not if it doesn't have a height of a tefach. So it's not going to bring tumah if it doesn't have a gap of a tefach. And b'lei chaitzis, it's also not going to do the opposite of interpose, of separate. So let's say you have a vessel on top, directly opposite the tumah, even all the way to the sky, what's on top of that tumah is going to become tameh, even though you have something in the way, because since that thing does not have a gap of a tefach, that's called tumah tzutza. It's called cramped tumah, which doesn't have an oil of tefach, and therefore it shoots through, it goes like straight up all the way to Shemayim. So we see that there is such a precedence in halacha of a gap of a tefach giving significance to an area of creating the laws of oil and tumah, and therefore says Rav Huna, that's the same thing over here regarding sukkah tefach sukkah. If the upper sukkah has at least a tefach, a handbreadth, that's going to invalidate the lower one because it's a sukkah beneath a sukkah. However, on the second interpretation of Rav Huna, they say no arba. They say the upper one has to have a gap of 4 tefachim. Because we don't find a significant area to be in its own domain. Not to be, it's not to be, let's say, Carmelist or to be Rosh Hashanah. You don't find Pachas Marba less than 4 tefachim, as the Gemara says in Shabbos of Zayin Minal. So here also, you can't really compare it to the laws of oil of Tumah, because here we're trying to create a separate domain, a separate area to be considered Sukkah Tachas Sukkah. So therefore, they say that no, it has to be at least 4 tefachim to be considered a significant area. Now, the Shmuel Amei says the third interpretation. He says no, asara, it has to be 10 tefachim high. He says, well, my time in the Shmuel's reason the Shmuel, why does it have to be so big to be a Sukkah Tachas Sukkah? He says, I'll tell you, Kekshera, Kach Psula. The way you validate is the way you invalidate it. Meaning you're trying to invalidate it because you're calling it two sukkahs, one sukkah beneath the other one. If the upper one does not have a hechsher sukkah, so then it's not quote unquote a sukkah, and then it's not going to invalidate the low one because of a sukkah tach sukkah. So therefore, if you want to invalidate mahachsher basara, just like to validate a sukkah has to have a height of 10 tvachim, apasula basara, to validate a low one beneath the upper one, it's got to be a sukkah tachas sukkah, and it's only a sukkah if it's 10 tvachim high. So therefore, that's why he says it's 10 tvachim. So we had three different opinions. We had a tefach, 4 tvachim, or 10 tvachim. So Tznan, the Gemara asks on the last opinion of Shmuel, who says it's 10 tvachim from our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, we had said that Rabbi Yehuda says in ein diyurin vel yoina. The Tanna Kama had said that the upper one is kasher tachta. It's possible when he says sukkah tachta sukkah. Rabbi Yehuda had said these enigmatic words. He said, if ein diyurin vel yoina, if there's no one living in the upper one, hatachtoinik sher, then the low one's going to be kasher. That's the words that Rabbi Yehuda had said. So the Gemara says, my ein diyurin. What does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he says there's no one living in the upper one? Even if you're in mamish, if you literally mean to say, you're going to translate literally that there's just there's vacancy, there's no one living in the upper sukkah. After the urine kagami, where you think if someone's living there, that's going to cause, if it's going to be kasher bustle, it's still a sukkah tachas sukkah. Who cares if someone's there or not? What does it have to do with it's a din dechetz, like they say, not in the government. It doesn't depend if someone's actually there. It's bechetz, it's sukkah tachas sukkah. So how could you say they would make it kasher? Rather, obviously, the way you have to translate the words "my ein diyurin" doesn't mean that if there's no dwellers in the upper one, the bottom one's going to be kasher. It means kol she'ein ruya l'dir. It means, of course, no one's there because it's not fit for dwelling. Now, what's the case that the upper sukkah is not fit for dwelling? Must be duloi gevay asar because it's not even 10 tvachim high, which is the minimum of that a person can fit inside. So that's what Rabbi is saying. Okay, so it's not 10 tvachim high. So Rabbi says then the low one's going to be kasher because it's not sukkah tachas sukkah, because that one's not a sukkah, because less than 10 tvachim. So wait a second. Mechlal, the inference is the Tanna Kama Saba, that the Tanna Kama who disagrees, and he holds that the low one is going to be pasul, is avadisha eina ru'la, that even though it's not fit for living, meaning it's less than 10 tvachim, that psula is going to be invalid, because what should be saying? We're saying, the low one could be kosher if it's less than 10 tvachim. That's what he's saying. We said it doesn't mean if no one's living. It means no one could live there. It's less than 10 tvachim. It doesn't be kosher. And he's disagreeing with the Tanna Kama. Tanna Kama is saying that no, it's still going to be possible. So you see, not like Shmuel from the Rabbanan, because Shmuel said it's only going, the low one's going to be a puzzle only if the upper one's 10 tvachim. And here we see clearly that's what the disagreement of Rabbi Yehuda is saying, that no, it's going to be a puzzle even if it's less than 10 tvachim. Says the Gemara, when Avdimi came, he said, they said in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, that this that Rabbi Yehuda says, ein ru'i l'dira, meaning the way we're translating, it's not because of it's not high enough. Because if that would be the case, no, it's not true. Everyone agrees to Shmuel that according to Tanna Kama, even according to Rabbanan, that it's going to be kosher because you cannot invalidate the low one if the up one is not at least 10 tvachim. Rather, what they translate in Eretz Yisrael, it means like this: Im ein hatachtoinu yochel kabel kar b'ksasa shel yoina. If the low one cannot contain the pillows and the cushions of the upper sukkah, meaning it's not strong enough, the schach of the lower sukkah, so that people could go and make a second story sukkah and put their cushion and pillows and sleep on that schach, because it's going to cave in the middle of sleeping in by sukkahs by the night. That's what we're saying, hatachtonik shiur. That's when we're going to say the low one's going to be kosher, from the same reasoning that actually Shmuel says. Because Shmuel says, the way to validate a sukkah is the way you invalidate a sukkah. Since the upper one is not fit to dwell in it, because the lower one cannot hold that weight, so therefore, that's what Yehuda is saying, so that's not going to invalidate the lower sukkah, not because of height. Everyone agrees that it's only going to invalidate because fakir, to the contrary. Rabbi Yehuda is actually saying Shmuel's halacha just in a different application. Shmuel's halacha was you cannot invalidate the lower sukkah unless the upper one's at least 10 tvachim. So that's not what Rabbi Yehuda means when he says if meaning if it's less than 10 tvachim, then it's going to be kosher, which that is like Shmuel. But that would make the Rabbanan not like Shmuel, because then the Rabbanan would be saying it's possible even less. But no, everyone agrees it can only invalidate by 10. The case of Rabbi Yehuda is it made because no one could be there simply because there's not enough. It can't hold the weight, and therefore, if it cannot hold the weight, so therefore that would not invalidate the lower one, because since the upper one cannot function, so it cannot invalidate the lower one. So, but then the Gemara says, wait a second. So then, okay, fine, you change the application, but it's still difficult. The inference is The Tanakh would hold that even though it's not fit to hold any one dwelling in the upper story in the second story sukkah, then psula, that they would still say it's going to be a puzzle. So at the end of the day, you still can infer that Rabban don't like Shmuel. And therefore you could say the same thing regarding if it's not 10 tefachim high. It's the same thing, it's just different application. What are you gaining by changing the case of Yehuda to, okay, Ein Yerun Ladir, not because of the height, because I don't want Rabban to disagree with that, because they agree that it's not going to be possible less than 10 tefachim. Oh, it's a different case, where it simply cannot hold the weight. Okay, but kechsher kechsula. And just like it's not validating the upper one, so it's not going to invalidate the lower one. So why would Rabban disagree and say that's going to be possible? So that says the Gemara, no. That the difference between them is that it could hold the upper people, but only by pushing it. In other words, Rabban hold that since ultimately b'doichik, if you push it, you could have people sleeping over there. Hey guys, you got to lean a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Somehow you could have a cushion like this, lean it against the wall. So the upper one is called a sukkah, and that's why it's going to invalidate the lower sukkah. Who the hell that no? Since you can't really use it in a regular normal way, that's not going to call the upper one as a sukkah. But everyone holds like Shmuel, which is the way only if how it would be validated as a sukkah. Only then will it invalidate the lower one as a sukkah. So if it's, let's say, less than 10 tefachim, everyone will agree to Shmuel that no, the lower one's not going to be possible. If you're right, no one could sleep in the upper one simply because it's uninhabitable, because you would sleep, you would fall right through the schach onto the bottom guy sleeping there, then of course it's not going to be kosher, because it's not kosher, it's not usable, so it cannot invalidate the lower. The machlekes is between it could be used, but shmach. Okay, well, it could be done, so then we're going to consider it as a sukkah, according to Rabbanan tachas a sukkah. Where's it going to be done? No, it's not really usable. We're not going to call it as a sukkah. Never, that was the machlekes, but no one necessarily is disagreeing with Shmuel. So never, those are the three different opinions we had regarding sukkah tachas sukkah. If it's a tefach, 4 tefachim, or 10 tefachim.
If it's a tefach, is it that malava? It's eliminated completely.
Right. I mean, but not everything that we say within 3 tefachim makes it into one entity. There is a discussion. I'm trying to remember somewhere that, but it is a sukkah. It is a schach. I mean, it has its own. It's not bottle, no, I'm saying like we didn't, no one said b'chavata when we had by the schach puzzle to say, oh, within 3 tefachim, so it's lava, and therefore you could do bittul, because it's a separate entity. So when you're connecting things, I hear you want to say that why wouldn't that make it into a one schach? That's a good question. Why wouldn't it make it into one schach? But they're saying that tefach, like you see by oil, it makes it into a separate area, like especially in laws of oil. So that would be considered as an oil, so it would be a sukkah tachas, a sukkah. Now, we continue in the next Mishnah, continue on the theme regarding not using kosher schach, which was the theme of the previous Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Pirs aleha sadin nehachama. Let's say, as this picture is illustrating, let's say you like we call it a shlak or whatever, you throw on a linen cloth over the schach because the sun's too sunny. So you put on like a curtain. Let's say you put like this picture showing beneath this sukkah, because of what's falling off. You don't want the leaves and the branches to fall on the table. And the thing significant about a sadin, about a sheet, is makabel tumah, like any garment, and therefore it's possible schach, as the Gemara tells them later on the next daf, and Daf Yomi. Let's say a different case. This one, Shapiris Agabi Hakinuf, which a kinuf had 4 legs by the 4 legs of the bed, and it's very high, and they put the poles. There's poles connecting them. The vertical poles have horizontal poles connecting them, and then they would spread out a curtain, and it would be very far from the schach. But in other words, even if, let's say, you don't have any sheets because of the falling branches or leaves, you're just putting it as to beautify the bed that you're sleeping on, or your beautiful bridal canopy for the bed. But in this third case, it's not because you're making the schach with something that's makabel tumah that's going to be a problem like in the first 2 cases, although they're both sheets, because here you're not spreading it out to be as schach, here you're just doing it to have a beautiful covering for your bed. Either one of these 3 cases is going to be psul. It's going to be a problem, because you're not sitting in a sukkah, because you have an oil that's mafsik, in this case, between you and the sukkah that you're in. And here it has the schach puzzle that's covering. But what you could do is you could spread the sheet on the naklite hamita, which klite hamita is different. That's you only have two poles on the two ends of the bed, which is in the middle, one by the leg and one by the head, and you put a pole connecting those two poles, and you spread on it a sheet, which slopes on either side. Now, what's the difference between this case and this case? Very simply, because this case, the naklita mita don't have a roof that's at least a tefach wide, so it's not called a oihel. And since it's not oihel, so you're not sitting in the oihel in the sukkah, you're sitting in the sukkah itself. So therefore, in this case, it's going to be kosher, but the kinov is going to be possible. Now, Amar Rav Chizda, he qualifies the opening halacha of our Mishnah, and he says, why should we not learn the puzzle of the case of mepnei hanashar, of when you put the sheet, because you don't want all those twigs and branches, everything falling in from that branches that you use, the palm fronds, el mepnei hanashar. Only if the reason why you put that curtain was because of all that's falling in. So essentially you're making that into schach, which is what a covering is, to protect. So therefore it's invalid because it's mekabel toma, which is schach pas. Avol in the Isa, and this is so interesting that your thoughts, your intention could change the halacha, but if let's say you're putting it as a decoration, so that's not a schach, you're not doing it for covering purposes, you're doing it for beautification purposes, sure, it's going to be kosher. Not only that, the Gemara asks Pshita, it's obvious. The Mishnah said explicitly because of what falls in. Why do you even have to tell me that if you're doing it not for what falls in, but rather for beautification, that's going to be possible? It says, well, yeah, Ma'odim, would you say, why didn't I said that? No, maybe actually it's even possible, even if you're doing it for beautification. And the reason why we said because of what falls in this orchid, we're just telling you what the norm is. Normally people hang up a sheet because they don't want anything to fall in. You have to tell you that no, it's not agav that it's saying it, it's dafka. That's only if it's hanashar, but if you're doing it for beautification, it's actually going to be kosher. Oh, because kinuf is a oil. Here it's not a oil. Here it's just a decoration for the schach. Yeah, that's a good question. Says well, let me say the Gemara says let's support this from the following brisa. Brisa says, Sicha kihilchasa. If you made appropriate schach according to the halacha, and you decorated the krumim with these types of woven garments, ubesadin hamtziyarin, or you have these embroidered linens, or these woven linens, betalaban, you're hanging in the sukkah, geizen, nuts, shkedim, almonds, afarsikin, peaches, rimonim, pomegranates, parchile anovim, clusters of grapes, batar shel shiboilin, and wreaths of grain, yenis, wine, shmanim, oil, salasas, and flour, which Rashi obviously points out that you're hanging these in glass cups for beautification because you can't really hang flour or wine or oil, but you have it in these glass cups hanging in the sukkah. So the halacha says the brisa also is stopping that. So you're not going to go ahead and use these items as you continue to the days until after the last day of the Yom Tov Sukkos, because of the halacha, it's called huktzah l'mitzvah, it's muktzah, it's set aside for the mitzvah purpose. Now, then hisna aleyan, but if you stipulated beforehand, hakol tonight everything will go according to your stipulation. Now, that's not so simple. Rashi points out, it has to be like you're saying, I'm not separating myself from these items the entire twilight of the first day when Yom Tov is starting. With therefore the sanctity of the mitzvah does not take effect on them. As the Gemara explains in the Sefet's Beit of Lama Beis, because other stipulations don't help because it is automatically muktzah. Okay, but that's what the Brisa says. But one thing is, says Rashi, that we see that the Brisa is telling us that you have sadinin, you have sheets, and we see that that's valid in the sukkah. I thought you told me that it's going to be a problem of schach. So that says the Gemara, no dimma minat tzad. Maybe this decorative sheets are on the side, they're actually for the walls. But yeah, on the top, I would tell you, meaning we wanted to bring this as a right Rav Chizda that said that if it's for beautification, it's going to be mutter. So you see, seemingly the Bryce is saying the same halacha, it's saying the sadinam tziyarin, so we could support Rav Chizda. And this is the Gemara, no. maybe I could tell you that new sheets that you're hanging up for beauty is actually on the wall. But maybe if it was on the roof, I would tell you that no, even for beautification, it's considered being mesachik with a davar makabel tama, and it would be considered a problem about schach pasel. So it's not a raya to Rav Chizda from the brisa, because maybe it's actually on the walls and not on the seal. But the Gemara continues on this theme regarding noye sukkah. What we learn, noye sukkah, the decorations of the sukkah. For example, let's say you have these sheets that are hanging above for beautification. So it does not diminish the height from, let's say, 20 amas to validate the sukkah. I mean, if you have a sukkah that's above 20 amas and you put the sheets that now it's less than 20 amas, it's not going to be valid because it's not from the schach itself. Because actually, if it would be schach, then actually, as Rashi explains, actually would be invalid because davar makabel tuma. So you can't diminish the height of the sukkah by having, now it's less than the gap of 20 because of the sadin hamtziyarim, because manav shach. If you're trying to make it less because of it, but that would actually invalidate it because then you want to consider it a schach, and it's schach pasla. It's actually invalid. And Rashi actually does the same thing also. So let's say it's 10 tefachim sukkah, and you're putting on the sheets that now it's less than 10 tefachim. That also would not invalidate it because again, it's not affecting the height and the measurements of the sukkah by putting up the sheets. Now, Amar Rav Ashi here, he however says interestingly, he says, but uminat tzad ma'iti. He says, however, from the side, actually, it would diminish from the measurement of 7 tefachim, which is the minimum of a sukkah. And the reason for that is very simply because now it does not contain your head, the majority of your body, and your table. So here it does have a different application than regarding the height. Here it doesn't fit to the minimum, and that's where we get the shiur of zayin tefachim. There it would diminish it. Now, the Gemara brings a story that Minyamin, who is Abdi de Rav Ashi, who is the servant of Rav Ashi, it got soaked, his shirt got soaked in water, and he spread it out on the sukkah to dry up. Somebody Rav Ashi said to him, Dal, you take it off. People shouldn't say, people are going to say, look, he has this shirt, this curtain hanging over here on the sukkah. You could use schach with somebody's makabel tama. So that he said to him, but people see that it's wet. It's pretty obvious that it's here hanging just to dry up and not to use a schach. So he says, you're right, what did I tell you that you have to take it off? Is when it dries up, don't leave it there, because then people are going to think that you're using some of this makabel tuma as schach, and that will give people the wrong understanding. Now, continue on this theme, we learned, noye sukkah, regarding the decorations of a sukkah, let's say like these sheets that are hanging beneath the schach for decorations, hamuflagim mimena arba. If it is 4 tefachim away from the schach, we have machlekes what the status is. Nachman make shiur, he says it's kosher. They say it's invalid, and the reason for that is because we already said before that it's kosher, because for noy sukkah, it's not considered being mesachah b'davar makabel tuma, it's not considered being mitzarv with schach possible, because it's not schach, it's just decorative. But why does this opinion hold that when it's 4 tefachim away, it's going to be invalid? Says Rashi explains, because you have an oihel that's being mafsik, and it comes out that you're not sleeping in the sukkah. But Nachman held, however, no, that since it's for noy sukkah, just for decorative purposes, so it's considered nullified to the schach, even if it is 4 tefachim away. So that's the machlekes if it's 4 tefachim away, which in decorations, that then you want to know, is it considered its own entity or considered batel? That's a machlekes. Which Gemara actually brings as a story. We had this machlekes. Rav Nachman had said it's kosher. Rav Chizda said it's pasul. So actually, all these 3 individuals are part of the story. Rav Chizda ben Rav Huna, who again they held that such a sukkah would be pasul. They went to the house of the Resh Galusa, who was in charge of all the Jews in the diaspora. Agninu Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, who he was the Av Bezdin, and he was a minister, and he was in charge of the house of the Resh Galusa, and they would do everything based on his psak. He went and put these 2 Amorim who disagreed with him on this halacha, he put them to sleep a sukkah and a sukkah sheno'eha, that its decorations will maflugim and menar 4 tefachim away from the schach, which again is not like the Rav Chizda Rav Huna hold. And ishtiku, they were silent, they didn't tell him anything, and they went to sleep in that sukkah that was not kosher according to them. Of course, it's 4 tefachim away, and therefore you're in a different oil, you're not in the sukkah. So he said to them, did the rabbis retract from their teachings? So why are you suddenly agreeing to me and using such a sukkah? So they said to him, no, you don't understand. Anan shluchim mitzvah na. We are agents on a mitzvah, which is there's a mitzvah to go ahead and receive the face of your Rebbe on the Yom Tov. And they're coming to receive the Resh Galusa. Upeturim in a Sukkah. And therefore we're exempt from the mitzvah of Sukkah, like a Mishnah teaches later on, Daf Yomi and Aleph, Shluchei mitzvah are peturim in the Sukkah, which as Taisa points out, obviously we're talking about that they wouldn't be able to have enough time to visit Resh Galusa and go ahead and try to find the kosher Sukkah. This is the only Sukkah available, so you're right. We're not going to Sukkah, because this curtain that's hanging is Munafat away and it comes out you're not sitting in the Sukkah. But it doesn't make a difference, because we don't have to be in the Sukkah, because we're Shluchei mitzvah, and that's why we're sitting in the Sukkah. Continuing on the theme of the Mishnah, I'm going to read the Mishmul. Says, Mutalishin Bekila, you're allowed to sleep in a canopy, which is spread out around the bed, the Sukkah in the Sukkah, even though it has a roof like this picture over here, meaning that you don't have the roof slanty like that of the Naklit Hamita, rather it's parallel to the bed itself, like that of Kinaifes, which we said in the Mishnah, which would be puzzle. Why? So why is it kosher? As long as it's not 10 tefachim above the bed, because less than 10 tefachim is not considered an oil. So you could have this canopy around your bed in the sukkah itself. But you want to ask a few different questions on this teaching of Shmuel. Tashma. Gemara says, come in here from the following brayso. Hayoshin b'kila b'sukkah. If someone's sleeping in a canopy in a sukkah, lo yotzei he's not to fulfill his obligation. What do you mean? That clearly contradicts Shmuel, who says you could sleep in a canopy. He says, you want to know? We're talking about in the brayso. That's kish kavayasah. When the canopy is 10 tefachim high, that's considered an oil, and but then you're not sleeping in the sukkah, you're sleeping in this canopy. The Gemara says basically from a Mishnah on Chavim and Beis. Mishnah says, Hayashon tachas hamita. B'sukkah, if someone's sleeping beneath a bed in a sukkah, lo yotzei not fulfill his obligation. Why not? What's between sleeping under a bed or sleeping under a canopy? It's the same thing. Is that considered in the sukkah or not? So the Gemara, no, take a Shmuel. Shmuel translated that Mishnah, but meeting about someone in a bed that's 10 tefachim high. And therefore, again, then you're in a separate oil, because that's the area of an oil is 10 tefachim. And then that's why it's not going to be valid, but it wouldn't be less. Yeah, you would be able to sleep under a bed if it is less than 10 tefachim, and it won't be a problem about sleeping in the sukkah. Well, so Tashmat's being right from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said 3 cases. The first 2 cases were one type. And then it said, or if you spread out the curtain on the 4 poles of the bed for the canopy, so it's going to be possible. So is he clearly not like Shmuel? He says, no, they're not Mishnah. They're talking about 10 tefachim high. 10 tefachim high is considered a separate area. The Gemara says, but we didn't learn like this in the brayso that explains our Mishnah. Could you learn the brayso like this? The brayso says, naklitin. What's naklitin? That's shnayim, like we already explained before. Naklitin is when you have the poles coming out in the middle of the bed, one by the head, one by the foot. That's shnayim. That's 2 poles. So therefore there's no gag. It's sloping down. The kinaifis, what's kinaifis? Is our it's 4 poles. And that's what the Bryce explains Allah about Mishnah. Appears like a kinaifis. So if you spread out the sheet on top of 4 poles, so it's going to be possible. Because again, you're under an oil. Al gabi naklitin, but if it's on top of the other poles, meaning when there's only 2 poles like we said, so then, sure, it's going to be kosher. Because again, there's no oil. It's slanted. But says the Bryce something very important. As long as these naklit amita are not 10 tefachim above the bed. Wait a second. You're telling me, Mechlal, the inference is that it must be the other case, the kinaifais, is alpha pisha in gevayna asara. Must be that even though it's not 10 tefachim high, it's going to be possible. Because the Mishnah said 2 cases, pasul and kasha. The kinaifais we said is pasul, naklit we said is kasha. The Bryce is telling me, when is this kosher? Only if it's not 10 tefachim high. If it's 10 tefachim high, yeah, this case would be possible. It would be considered as a separate item. So wait a second, that means to say in this case he says it's possible, is also not 10 tefachim high, because you're contrasting the 2. This kosher, this possible. When's this kosher? Less than 10 tefachim. When's this possible? Must be also not 10 tefachim. That's not like Shmuel, who said that's only considered a problem about a canopy if it's 10 tefachim high. Oh no, says the Gemara, no. Shani kinaifis. The case of kinaifis is different. The case of our Mishnah of kinaifis is different. Why? The kavi, although it sounds the same, and we were explaining the same, there's different types of beds that you have canopies for. A kinaifis is a very permanent type of a a bed canopy. It's those beds that you find in the houses, you have this canopy, it always remains there, it's a permanent. So therefore, it's going to be probably even less than 10 tefachim high, because you're in a totally different area. Even less than 10 tefachim. But a kila, a regular bed canopy, is not so strong and permanent like kinayfis. So therefore, if it's not 10 tefachim high, it's not considered as significant, and therefore it's not a contradiction on Shmuel. Shmuel's talking about a regular canopy that you hang up and you put over the bed. So since it's not so permanent, it's got to be 10 tefachim. But if you have a kinayfis, yeah, even less than 10 tefachim, since it's permanent, it's going to be a problem about not sleeping in the sukkah. Then says, wait a second. Very sukkah gabi sukkah. Yeah, the case of a sukkah beneath on top of a sukkah, the kivi, which that's permanent, it's a structure. And yet, v'amar Shmuel, as we had said previously, Shmuel said in that case of kech shera kach pesula, that the way you validate a sukkah is the way you have to invalidate. Now, what's the validation of a sukkah? It's 10 tefachim. So Shmuel said a sukkah tachas sukkah is only a problem if the upper sukkah is 10 tefachim, only then when the lower one be puzzled. But a sukkah is a permanent structure. So why is it any different than you just told me for kinayfais? You told me for kinayf it's going to be a problem because it's kivi, even less than 10 tefachim, as a psul that you're not in the sukkah. So then why over here is it any different? Why does the upper sukkah have to be 10 tefachim to invalidate that you're in a sukkah tachas sukkah? But it's also kivi. Should have to be a problem even less than 10 tefachim. So the Gemara says it's svara. They said no, it's different. Why? Hasam over there, the lemisal sukkah. When in the case of sukkah tachas sukkah, what you're trying to do is you're trying to invalidate the lower sukkah. That's ba'asar. Then the upper sukkah has to have 10 tefachim, like we said, kech sheir, kech besula, because as long as the upper one's not called a sukkah, it's not going to be strong enough to invalidate the lower one. But here they were trying to make this into an oil, meaning that you can't sleep beneath that canopy, but the rest of the sukkah is going to be kosher. Again, it's not affecting the whole sukkah. It's just talking about, is this thing making an oil? But some asar and nami haba that yes, if it's a permanent structure, then even less than 10 tefachim, it's going to be an oil. Meaning to invalidate a sukkah, it's got to be a sukkah. It's got to be 10 tefachim. But we're not invalidating a sukkah here when you're in the canopy. The rest of the sukkah is kosher. The guy with bunkmates next to you, right next to you, sleeping on the floor, he's in a kosher sukkah. You, for yourself, in this, so less than 10 tefachim could also be an oil if it's a permanent thing, and that's not difficult from here where you're trying to invalidate the lower sukkah. That's going to be a real sukkah of 10 tefachim. Now, continuing on this theme, says the Gemara Amar of Tachlif about Avim Amar Shmuel. He says, Hayashon Bekila, it's a related halacha. If someone sleeps in this canopy, the bed that has a canopy around it, Arum, if he's undressed, what he could do is Maitzi Reish Chutz Lekila, he could stick his head out of the canopy, and he could say Kriyishma. The reason that is because since it's not an oil, so we don't say where the majority of his body is, that's where we consider his head to be. And then it would be a problem to say Kriyishma because you now say Dvam Shabakdusha when there's an erva, which the person's undressed. It would be a problem Leira B'cha Erva's Davar. Rather, it's considered as if his head is out of his shirt. And you don't say, well, underneath your shirt, you're not dressed. No, the head is considered separate. Here also, since this kila is less than 10 tefachim, it's not considered as an oil, which is 10 tefachim. And rather, it would be like a jacket that you're wearing. And if you're sticking your head out, you could say Kriyishma. But basically, the Gemara is from the following brayso: Hayashim Bekila Arma. If someone's sleeping in a canopy undressed, Lo Yaitzi Reish Chutz Lekila Kriyishma. He's not allowed to stick his head out of the canopy and say Kriyishma. You're undressed. So who cares if you're sticking your head out? You can't say Kriyishma. Says Gemara, and this is really the theme of what we had previously been saying. Oh, the tent, like my skin, we're talking about Kush Givai Asar. If the tent is 10 tefachim high, so then it's considered an oil, and you are undressed in the oil, and therefore your head is considered part of your body, and therefore that's not going to help by just sticking your head out. But when it's less than that, then it's going to be considered not as an oil, and then since your head is in a different area, so then it's like you have your head out of your shirt. That is also going to be permitted to say Kriyishma, because less than 10 tefachim is considered closed up. As Nima says, it's actually logical like this. What's the raya? Because Militani Sefer, the Sefer of that Bryce explains and says, what could you be comparing this to? When the Bryce said that you cannot stick your head out, which we had asked as a contradiction and we gave an answer. It said you can't. It compares it to someone standing in a house undressed. He's not just stick his head out the window and say Krishma, because what does that help? You're still undressed. You are seeing your error. So says the Gemara, Shema Mina, obviously that we're talking about where the height is 10, because we're comparing it to house. So when we're saying by kila it's a problem by canopy, it's obviously because it's 10 tefachim, and then it's an oil, so then it's like a house, and then it's a problem. But however, if it would be less than that, so then it wouldn't be a problem, as Shmuel had said. Now, as we see on top of Yud Aleph and Aleph, however, this teaching, Rashi says, is its own idea. They don't say that a house is like a canopy, where if it's not high, it would permit you to stick your head out the window, because we're comparing the canopy to the house. It says the Gemara, no, bayis nami. But a house, however, since even though it's not 10 tefachim high, but kivin the kaviyah, since it's permanent, so oil ohu, so it's still considered as an oil. As we had said this svara previously, if something is very permanent, we consider oil even less than 10 tefachim, and then your head is considered part of your body. And there, because like we said, the legarmi kinaifis, it's not less than the kinaifis, which we had said, kinaifis are those things that are going to be a problem, even though it's less than 10 tefachim, because they're permanent. A house for sure, for these halachas and brachas too, and Vam Shebekdusha is going to be a problem, even if it's less than 10 tefachim, and you can't stick your head out the window, although you can do it by the canopy, because that's not so permanent, and therefore if it's less than 10 tefachim, that has a similar halacha, like we said before, it's not going to be considered oil, it's like just like your shirt, and you can stick your head out and say Krishma. Thank you for any time for hosting us.